The Baylor Bears gave Gonzaga another quad one win on Wednesday. What it means for the Zags with Selection Sunday just around the corner.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All right, folks, on today's show, we got one final resume update for Gonzaga. This is the final episode before Selection Sunday. We will know the bracket. We will know the matchups. We will know Gonzaga's path to keeping their Sweet 16 streak alive. We're going to talk about some latest projections, what Baylor's win over Kansas State means for the Zags. We also got some mailbag questions. We're going to talk about Gonzaga's two big lineup, Ike and Huff starting against St. Mary's, whether we could see that going forward for the Zags. And we'll talk about some of the top seeds that we want Gonzaga to avoid getting a matchup with in the round of 32. We'll start with the Baylor Bears. They got a win in the Big 12 tournament over Kansas State. That win bumped them from 33rd in the net to 30th in the net, meaning that Gonzaga's win against Baylor from way back on November 4th, which for most of the season was a quad one win. It had dropped to the quad two territory as Baylor fell outside the top 30. They are now back in the top 30, just directly at 30th as I'm recording this on Thursday afternoon. That is a good news for Gonzaga. Baylor does play Texas Tech at 4 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday, so that game has not happened yet as I'm recording this. The good news about Baylor playing a team as good as Texas Tech is that the odds of Baylor falling in the net are fairly slim. They would have to get blown out, and it's not like it's impossible that they could get blown out. Many of you listening to this on Friday probably already know the result of this game, may already even know where Baylor is at in the net rankings as it refreshes every single day. But for Gonzaga, for Baylor, they're in a spot where they could pretty comfortably, they don't even have to win this game to stay in the top 30 in the net, which would be great news for Gonzaga because as of this recording, Gonzaga has a 5-5 record in quad one games. Nice to be 500 in quad one games. I think it looks nice to the committee members. I think they like seeing that. The reason that it's 5-5 as opposed to being 5-6, however, is that West Virginia, the 8th seeded team in the Big 12 tournament, lost to the 16th seeded team in the Big 12 tournament. The Colorado Buffaloes have now beaten both TCU and West Virginia in their quest to do a complete stunner and win the Big 12 tournament. Probably not going to happen, but a nice run here by Tad Boyle's team. Unfortunately, West Virginia fell below the threshold to be a quad one loss for Gonzaga, meaning the Zags go from having 2 quad two losses to now having 3 quad two losses because of West Virginia's late season struggles. Also on Thursday morning, Indiana, we'd hope the Hoosiers could find a way to take down the Oregon Ducks and advance in the Big Ten tournament. That likely would have pushed them from 52nd in the net up to top 50, which would have given Gonzaga another quad one win. They didn't win the game. We don't know what the refresh looks like, but I would be surprised if Indiana moves up 2 spots after losing to Oregon. So I suspect that will not end up being a quad one win for Gonzaga. So as of right now, Gonzaga's 5-5 in quad one games. Their wins being Baylor and San Diego State early in the season, and then San Francisco and Santa Clara, both on the road to close out the WCC regular season. And then, of course, beating St. Mary's in the WCC championship. Those are your 5 quad one wins. Your losses being the 2 against St. Mary's in the regular season, Kentucky, UConn, and UCLA all in the non-conference. For Gonzaga in the quad 2, 5-3, wins being Arizona State, Indiana, San Francisco, Washington State, and San Francisco again. And then their losses being Oregon State and Santa Clara, the devastating week in January when they took those 2 losses. And then now West Virginia being a quad 2 loss as well. Zags 15-0 combined between quad 3 and quad 4. Bracketology, some updates from the Thursday show that many of you listened to now. We got a few other updates here. Bracket Matrix, which had 88 brackets submitted, had an average for Gonzaga of a seed about 7.6. It's gone up very slightly, 7.35 being the average now in 94 brackets submitted. So a few new brackets, a few people have adjusted and moved Gonzaga up a seed line. Before Their highest was a 6. Now they have a couple spots that actually have them as a 5 seed. I think that's very unlikely, if we're being honest, although at this time last year, I would have told you the exact same thing. And what do you know? Gonzaga did get a 5 seed last year. But the majority of people have them in the 7-8 conversation. That is pretty consistently where Gonzaga is being projected right now in the field of 68, with just 48 plus hours until Selection Sunday. A couple specific bracketology updates. Joe Lunardi has been refreshing his bracket every 3 to 4 hours or so as a new wave of games finishes up. He had moved Gonzaga from an 8 seed to a 7 seed after Gonzaga's win over St. Mary's in the WCC championship. He was one of few bracketologists who actually bumped Gonzaga. A lot of people still have them in the 8-9 conversation. A lot of people didn't really move St. Mary's down. It felt like that game didn't have that big of an impact on some of the bracketologists. We'll be curious to see how much it kind of carries weight with the committee on Selection Sunday, since they're the ones who, actually make the bracket, not the ones who are just projecting it. But Lunardi had moved Gonzaga onto the 7 line, had them squared off against a 10-seeded Drake team out of the Missouri Valley Conference. Now, still has them as a 10 seed. This is as of about 10 a.m. Pacific time on Thursday morning. Still has them as a 7 seed. Still has them facing a 10 seed. That seed has switched to now being Oklahoma. Porter Moser's Sooners coming out of the SEC. Oklahoma's been on the bubble for a very long time after a perfect non-conference record and then a significant struggle in conference play in the SEC. But they picked up a nice win in the SEC tournament over Georgia. We'll talk about Georgia in a second, actually, who's also projected around that 10 seed line. So for Gonzaga, this could be a matchup against Oklahoma, team they didn't get to face in the battle for Atlantis, as Oklahoma advanced to the championship of that event, but Gonzaga did not after their loss, of course, to West Virginia. The 2 seed in Lunardi's latest would be Tennessee. We're going to talk about some of the 1s and 2 seeds later in the show and kind of who we would prefer to see versus who we would not prefer to see in the NCAA tournament as a 2 seed or 3 seed or 1 seed, depending on what seed Gonzaga gets. For Oklahoma, if it were this, Jeremiah Fears, huge problem. He's a freshman guard, lottery pick, foul merchant, great at getting the line, great shooter, would be a matchup nightmare for Gonzaga. On3's latest bracketology had Gonzaga. Initially, they had them as a 6 seed. I put it in the notes. We were going to talk about how On3 has Gonzaga as a 6 seed. Literally during that time, the author refreshed his bracketology and had Gonzaga down as a 7 seed, flipped it with Louisville being in that 6 seed conversation. What he had eventually was Gonzaga as a 6 seed, squaring off against a play-in 11 seed between West Virginia and Indiana. I think the odds of that happening were extremely low since Gonzaga played literally both those teams in the regular season. The bracket also had the 3 seed being Kentucky. As fun as it would be to have a region fully of teams that Gonzaga could get revenge on from earlier in the season, I don't think that was particularly likely. On3 eventually adjusted the bracket, now has Gonzaga as a 7 seed taking on a 10 seed. Georgia, another SEC team, the team that lost to Oklahoma. Most places had Georgia in the 9 seed conversation prior to their loss to Oklahoma, so it makes sense they'd be in that 10 seed conversation. The 2 seed is Texas Tech. In this particular situation, if Gonzaga were to play Georgia, it'd be a battle of the G Bulldogs, but also Georgia, a team that starts a star freshman, Asa Newell, who was heavily pursued by Gonzaga on the recruiting trail. Newell's likely lottery pick this year, 6'11", rangy big. He's a great rebounder, great rim runner, very good, versatile defensive player. He's also got a little bit of an outside shot. That hasn't fully developed yet, but is there. Georgia, I think, is a decent matchup for Gonzaga. I think they'd be favored, and I think they could win this one, but man, Asa Newell would be a problem for the Zags to work against in this specific context. That's going to be it for bracketology. We'll have an actual bracket next show. Very excited to be able to break that down with you. But now I want to move on to some mailbag questions that were submitted over the last week. Gonzaga might be facing a 1 or a 2 seed in the second round, as we've talked about with their potential 7-8 seeds. So what are those teams that Gonzaga matches up decent against? What are the teams that Gonzaga just absolutely does not want to see anywhere near their region when that bracket comes out on Sunday? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, the Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers, they're on an MVP level with the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds. It can quite literally carry the whole team plus the gear wherever you need to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. So take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, even who you think is going to cut down the nets. On FanDuel, when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around. And with tournament games happening almost every day, there's always exciting action to get in on. Right now, Gonzaga's plus 700 to make the Final Four. If you're buying the recent surge, you think this is the year Mark Few's taking a low seed to the Final Four. Plus 700, pretty good cash coming your way if you get that correct. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're closing out the show, the week. We're closing out the period of time where we don't know who Gonzaga is going to play in the NCAA tournament. We're going to close it out with some mailbag questions. 4 total questions spanned over the next 2 segments. This first one comes from Heiserbird on Discord, who says, which projected 1 and 2 seeds do you think Gonzaga matches up with the best and the worst? All right, let's talk about it. So what I did is I went to bracketmatrix.com, again, 94 brackets, all they've collected them all and averaged them out. And so we're going to look at the top 2 projected 1 seeds and 2 seeds amongst all of these 94 brackets, and we're going to just talk about which teams are the best and the worst. So I have 4 teams as the best, 4 teams as the worst. And really, it's honestly basically just the 4 teams projected to be 1 seeds are the worst matchups for Gonzaga. The 4 teams projected to be 2 seeds are the best matchups for Gonzaga. Part of it is just pure talent on those teams, but I do think that there's an actual matching up element to it. So if you're for Gonzaga folks, we really want a 7 seed. We really want a 7 seed because an 8-9 seed is brutal with the amount of talent these 1 seeds have. So we'll go through the best here. Michigan State, St. John's, Tennessee, and Alabama are the 4 that I put as the best matchups in that order specifically. Michigan State, they don't have a ton of size, and they're not a good 3-point shooting team, and I think that could be enough for Gonzaga to be able to take this team down. Very good Michigan State team, don't get me wrong. Obviously, all 8 of these teams are very good. They're a good defensive team, top 5 in the country in that metric. But Gonzaga just played a team that's very good defensively and that isn't a great 3-point shooting team, and they beat them. Granted, they lost to them twice in the regular season, but I think Gonzaga has the ability to do some damage against Michigan State with their size and with the just I think the roster construction works well for Gonzaga in this one. St. John's a bad shooting team. That's why they're here. I think they're a team that could go cold and potentially lose early, but they're tough, physical, big guards. I think they're going to be a matchup problem for Gonzaga. Kadari Richmond's got multiple inches and probably 20 pounds on Ryan Nembhard. If they put him on him, that's going to be really difficult for Gonzaga to get into their actions as easily as they would like. But I could see some ways where Gonzaga could really take down a St. John's team. Tennessee's overly reliant on Chaz Lanier offensively, the same way they were overly reliant on Dalton Knecht offensively last year. I think they're a great defensive team, but their offense can stall out if Chaz Lanier has an off night, and if Gonzaga is able to shut him down, I could see them finding a way to grind out a W there. And then Alabama, their defense is still suspect. It's better now after they added Cliff Omarui from Rutgers in the offseason. He's a great defender, and he'd be a problem for Graham Ike, but I still don't buy this team defensively. They're really relying on the 3-point shot, and they're good at it. Don't get me wrong, very, very good at it. But they're a team that's a little bit streaky, and I could see them bowing out a little early if the shots aren't falling in a specific night. The worst matchups, pretty obvious: Duke, Florida, Auburn, Houston. I put them in that order. Duke is a nightmare matchup for Gonzaga. Obviously, for those of you who are listening to the show, shortly after it comes out, Cooper Flagg suffered an injury just before halftime of the game against Georgia Tech, a game that Duke was losing. They ended up coming back winning, so they're advancing in the ACC tournament. There's no structural damage for Cooper Flagg's ankle. It sounds like he's kind of in a day-to-day situation. I would be surprised if he played the rest of the ACC tournament, but it does sound like he'll be healthy in time to return for the NCAA tournament. Malik Brown, their backup center, best defender on that roster, outside of Flagg, I suppose. He's also out with an injury. So when they're healthy, though, Kaman Maluak's a phenomenal rim protector. He would shut down Graham Ike better than most players in the country. I don't know how on earth Gonzaga would stop Cooper Flagg, and I don't know who he would be great defensively against Gonzaga as well. This is a really bad matchup for Gonzaga. Florida, Todd Golden's familiar with Mark Few. Their backcourt is phenomenal. Walter Clayton Jr., Will Richard, and Elijah Martin. They all have size. They all have strength. They all have just tremendous, talented backcourt. And then I think Florida's frontcourt doesn't get enough attention, but they're very good as well. Alex Condon is a floor spacing big, a tenacious rebounder. Ruben Chinyelu, transfer from Washington State, is a great big for them as well. Now with Micah Handlockton back, this team has tons of depth, talent all across the board. A coach who's familiar with Gonzaga. I don't like that matchup at all. For the Zags, Auburn, best team in college basketball. Janai Broome, one of the best players in college basketball. This team's 10 deep. Their guard play is a little bit suspect, which is why they're a tiny bit lower on this list than Duke and Florida. But trust me, you don't want to see Auburn either. Very, very good team. Have a bit of a history, a bit of a reputation for not doing great in March. So Auburn probably doesn't want to see Gonzaga. They don't want to see UConn or whoever, what other potential 8 seeds they could face, because they know the risk of losing early when this team has been so dominant all season long. But Auburn's not the worst matchup for Gonzaga, but it's not a great one either. And then Houston's not very big, but they're very physical. JoJo Tugler is a machine. LJ Cryer's fantastic in the backcourt. Milos Uzan, a transfer they added this year, has been a tremendous addition for Kelvin Sampson's club. Houston's a tough matchup because they just play so different from Gonzaga. But Gonzaga's got enough size that I think they could match up okay against Houston. Again, they're in the worst category, but they're not the worst among these teams. But a really tough team that would be a challenge for Gonzaga, just like any of these teams will be. That's why they're 1 and 2 seeds, and that's why Gonzaga is not in that conversation this year. Next question here comes from Sourdog on Discord, who says, is there a strategy behind losing the opening tip? It seems like we've lost about 90% of the tips this year. I didn't look it up. It's just how it feels. Is it about wanting the possession arrow or wanting the ball to begin the second half? I don't know. I mean, I wish I had a better answer for you. I think it's more so just it's not that important to Gonzaga. This isn't new to this year. Gonzaga has very often not taken the opening tip all that seriously. Haven't had their tallest player do the opening tip frequently. They haven't put in a ton of effort to jumping really high and really trying to win that thing. I think they just don't view it as being particularly important because, again, as you said in your question, if you don't win the opening tip, you get the first possession on a jump ball, or you get the ball to start the second half. I just don't think it's something that they view as being all that important. And it's not entirely exclusive to them either. You watch other college basketball games and it doesn't seem like a lot of teams are putting a ton of effort in trying to win this thing. It's also like you can be the first guy up there. You can be the guy who makes the tip, but you still, it could get tipped to another teammate. My read on the situation, without asking any deep questions or anything like that, is that it's just not something that they value as being something worth working on in practice or trying to get a lot better at, because it just doesn't feel like it is something that matters to them all that much. Well, Gonzaga's 2 big lineup worked wonders against St. Mary's in the WCC Championship. Is it something we could see again in the big dance? That and more coming up in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you just stop managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. My wife and I always want to make sure that we are on the same page when it comes to finances, and thankfully with Monarch Money, managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show, closing out the week, closing out the pre-selection Sunday portion of the Locked On Zags podcast this year to answer a few more mailbag questions to get you into your weekend. This question here comes from BD Brownie on Discord, who says, with how successful the Ike Huff lineup was against St. Mary's, is this a lineup you think few could lean into going into the tournament? I don't see many weaknesses to doing so, or at least the positives outweigh the negatives. I'm curious how you view it. It's worth pointing out BD Brownie took a ton of notes, a ton of research in the question and laid out a lot of things that were really, really fantastic. I think it's matchup dependent. And I know that that's almost kind of feels like a cop-out answer, but it's true. It's matchup dependent. I think it can work. I think we saw the obvious positives in the game against St. Mary's. But I also think a lot of those positives came from the fact that Gonzaga was doing something different against a team they'd already played twice this year. I don't think that the switch to the two big starting lineup would be as impactful playing a team that hasn't seen Gonzaga this year. You know what I mean? Like, I think it had that impact because, again, it's always a chess match between Randy Bennett and Mark Few, and Gonzaga, they struck first. They made the first move. They put Randy Bennett and the Gales on their heels by making a starting lineup change and doing things differently offensively, bringing the ball through Huff, letting him go to work against Paulus Morauskas. St. Mary's wasn't really prepared for that, and it hampered them and put them in a hole that they struggled to get out of. That's where the advantage came from on Tuesday. That doesn't mean that it won't work in the NCAA tournament. In fact, I think that it will work in the NCAA tournament. I just think that the impact, the very obvious impact that we saw in that game was driven by a little bit more than just the actual specifics of the lineup change, if that makes sense. For me, the big issue is the risk of foul trouble. And in B.D. Brownie's notes here that he took, he mentioned like the comfort of playing Ismaila Diani more. I'm kind of not in agreement there. I don't think Mark Few wants to play Ismaila Diani outside of garbage time in the NCAA tournament. I don't think that they view him as somebody they can rely on to bring into a game and give them big minutes if Ike and Huff both get in foul trouble. I think that is something that they will do if they need to, but I don't think it's something that they want to do. I don't think it's something that they're comfortable with. I also agree that it shouldn't be. Like, I love Ismaila Diani. I love what he did in that Santa Clara game, but I don't think it's worth taking the risk of, hey, we may need Diani to give us 5 good minutes in the first half because both our bigs are in foul trouble. That's a significant risk. Because Diani might pick up 2 fouls in 40 seconds like he did against St. Mary's or San Francisco. I can't remember which game that was, and really hamper your team at that point. So I think that there are some benefits. I think, again, matchup-wise against a team that has bigs that can space the floor or put the ball on the deck, I think you're in trouble there because neither Huff or Ike are great perimeter defenders in terms of their lateral mobility, whereas Ben Gregg and Michael Ajayi in particular are both much better at defending away from the rim. So I think it worked against St. Mary's because Paulus Morauskas was not shooting well, and their offense wasn't predicated on bringing their bigs away from the rim. It wouldn't work against certain teams. So it really does depend on the matchup. I do think Mark Few will be willing to do it. Whether it's actually in the starting lineup or just playing them together more, I'm not sure. But I think if the matchup dictates it, if they think it's going to work, both these guys are unselfish. They're willing to pass the basketball. They can make the entry pass from the top of the key. Both of them are at least modicum threats from the three-point line. You're not really sacrificing three-point shooting because neither Ben Gregg or Michael Ajayi are good shooters this year either. So I think it could work, but I think the risks are closer to outweighing the negatives. Or the negatives are closer to outweighing the positives than I think, at least in my opinion, than maybe B.D. Brownie's here. But it is worth keeping an eye on because I do think we might see it depending on the matchup. Final question of the show comes from Grand Chef Otto on Discord, who says, is there a rational explanation as to what happened with the three-point shooting in the WCC championship game? Is the most contagious case of the yips I've ever seen. Yeah, there's a couple of rational explanations. It's almost certainly some combination of all of these things. One, unfamiliar rims. I know Gonzaga and St. Mary's had both played at the Orleans Arena the previous night. Gonzaga, of course, playing San Francisco in that game. St. Mary's, of course, playing Pepperdine. But when you're playing at a place you haven't played very much, you're playing at a place you play once a year or twice a year. I think that does have an impact. You see teams shoot poorer on neutral site floors, like the Battle for Atlantis and the other MTEs often have poor shooting performances because none of those teams are really comfortable with their new environment. You see it sometimes in the NCAA tournament. There's other factors at play there, playing a new opponent, 3 games in 3 days, whatever it may be. But I think the unfamiliar rims is a part of it. I think the nerves and pressure are part of it, as you alluded to in your question with the yips. I do think that was part of it. I think these guys were all jacked up. Everybody felt the pressure of we need to win this game. We need to win a championship. I think everybody was keyed up, and you could really tell. And so I do think that contributed to a lot of especially the open missed shots. Like, there were so few open shots in this game because both teams swarmed defensively that when a guy got an open shot, I think they panicked a little bit of like, oh, I have to shoot it. Like Ben Gregg missed 2 threes in a row. His first one was wide open, and you could see the wheels turning. He knew, I'm supposed to shoot this shot, and he shot it and he missed it, and the rebound bounced back to him, and he was wide open again, and he shot it again. Neither of them were bad shots. I don't think he made a mistake, but I think there's pressure of like, oh man, I can't miss 2 in a row. Like, I think that those things do contribute to it. Again, they're human. They're not only human, they're kids. They're 20-something, 22-year-old kids, playing a really competitive, emotional basketball game. So that's absolutely part of it. And then I think another key that's a pretty simple one. Both these teams are just bad three-point shooting teams. Like, that was known before the game. These are not good three-point shooting teams. It was not like Alabama got together with, take your pick of any other great three-point shooting team in the country, Louisville. Like, let's say Alabama, Louisville combined to shoot 1 of 31. That would be a huge story. But two bad three-point shooting teams, one of them who slows possessions and is great defensively, playing a game where both teams shot poorly is, I mean, the rate of how poor these teams shot is pretty incredible. But the fact that there wasn't a great shooting game when you consider the two teams, it's not really that surprising. And then the last point I'll make here, both these teams wear you down. St. Mary's, because of their slow, methodical offense where they make you work and work and work on the defensive end, it's exhausting. Gonzaga does a lot of the same things, and they didn't play as, they tried to play fast in this game when they could. They set the pace better than they typically do against St. Mary's, but you could tell that Gonzaga's offense was wearing out the Gales. St. Mary's offense was wearing out the Zags. And I think it just contributed to both teams just feeling the extra emotional weight, the physical exhaustion, second game in a row. There's just a lot of factors that kind of all correlated together to make this a ridiculously poor shooting night. I don't think it's something that would happen again if these teams played 10 times on a neutral floor in the same environment, the same situation. I don't think you'd see any other games that are that poor shooting-wise, but that was just a perfect storm of a situation that allowed this game to be hideous from beyond the arc. Folks, I got an announcement here before we wrap up the show. Some of you may have seen this. I posted it on social media. I posted a link in the show notes as well. I will be part of the Bracket Breakdown show sponsored by Locked On and Amazon that is going on next. It'll be every Sunday and Monday for the next 3 weeks. In March Madness, I'll be in Dallas, Texas with my Locked On college basketball co-host, Isaac Shade, as well as a litany of professional analysts, Gordon Hayward, a longtime NBA star. He's going to be there. Monique Billings, a WNBA player, a handful of other great analysts will be there. We'll be breaking down Selection Sunday, talking about the bracket. We'll also be reacting to the games live. Again, the next 3 Sundays, I'll be in Dallas. If you have an Amazon Fire TV, that's the easiest way to watch the Bracket Breakdown show. There'll be a link in the show notes if you want to check it out. I sincerely appreciate all of you who have been with me throughout this season here on Locked On Zags, and those of you with me on Locked On College Basketball as well. It's very much appreciated. I am so excited to get a chance to go to Dallas, be in studio, and talking about some of these college basketball games as the tournament gets underway. That's going to wrap it up for me today here on Locked On Zags. Thanks so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Again, hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. Join the Discord channel. Link is in the show notes as well. Have a fantastic weekend. Looking forward to Selection Sunday as always. And of course, go Zags.